Now, let's get you details on what's happening in Iran. A massive mobilization against hijab. Astonishing courage that's being witnessed on camera, where Iranian women are mass burning hijabs in their revolt.
So this is an uprising of sorts which can be seen in Iran from different places. Madhav, who's joining us live right now, because in different parts of the country we are looking at how the gatherings that have been taking place, protests that have been taking place, and this is happening against the administration, against the so-called morality police there, Madhav.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, these are pictures of the protests that have been on for quite a few days now. At least for the last 3 days, we've been seeing protesters hit the streets and in fact voice their concern about not just the sort of religious police that exists there in Iran to actually, enforce such kind of religious laws as far as hijab is concerned. But now what we're looking at is, the way and the manner in which women are coming out in the open, burning these hijabs. There is cheers and clapping that is happening while in fact these protests takes place, and all of this really of course showing what the public sentiment in Iran is concerned when it comes to the hijab. And this is of course a very, very important moment, because here you have women who are coming out and taking off the hijabs and burning them as a sign of protest, and really of course showing that the anger has peaked as far as this particular issue is concerned. So one will have to see what happens and how this all plays out on ground in Iran, a country that was of course earlier believed to have several decades ago been very moderate in terms of the kind of Islam that was practiced, and after more conservative elements came into place, in fact the religious police and other such aspects also becoming coming to the order of the day. Recent incidents of course, where in one incident where particular which has caught the attention and has outraged many is the incident of Mahsa, where Mahsa Amini, in fact just a small strand of hair coming out of a hijab, led to the religious police going ahead and in fact taking her into custody, and following which her death took place. Now this has seriously outraged citizens in Iran, both men and women, and particularly of course large numbers of women who are seen on the streets in all of these protests. And this of course at some level or the other has also provoked debate here in India, where hijab itself is under so much of scrutiny. There's so much of public discourse surrounding the hijab, and on one hand there is of course those who argue that this is about religious freedom and the right for a woman's dignity or modesty. Those are some arguments that come in. At the same time there are those who say that this must go, that it is ancient practice and at many levels is nothing but an attempt to subjugate women, is the argument that has also come in at the same time. So clearly this debate here in India, of course there's no comparing the two, because India of course is a liberal democracy. It is up to the citizens ultimately what they want to do. But when it comes to countries like Iran, where there is a theocratic system in place, where it is the religious laws that actually rule the roost, this debate becomes all the more significant, particularly for conservative elements in India who defend the hijab. Certainly this is
That's right, because it's caused tremors across the world. Madhav, do stay on with us. We have Mr. Swapnil Kothari also joining us. How do you view what's happening in Iran? Women symbolically not just throwing but even burning hijabs as symbols of oppression.
That's Iran for you, and it's taken a major revolutionary turn out there for the women, because apparently one woman was killed and beaten up, etc., in police custody for not wearing the hijab properly. So there seems to be a great revolution of sorts. And it's ironical that today in the Supreme Court the hearing is still on, where issues are being fought for hijab, where the Karnataka government has given up a little bit of a concession there, saying that at least the hijab should be allowed in, they don't have a problem if it's allowed in school premises, but certainly not in the classroom. So I believe the Supreme Court will confirm the order of the Karnataka High Court not allowing hijab, but it will concede to the extent that it can be allowed on the school premises, but not actually inside the classrooms. So to that extent, the Supreme Court may differ with the order, because the Karnataka government itself has conceded to that extent. So the Supreme Court may not have a problem with that concession. So let's see whether this case, how this case evolves further. I don't think it's going to matter much now. Eventually, the court will have to conclude the hearing and pass an order confirming the order of the Karnataka High Court to the extent that I think it will differ. And Iran will continue to have these revolutions until and unless they do away with hijab to a certain significant extent, especially in the mainstream of society, from what I can see and from what I can understand as far as the developments in Iran are concerned.
Right, but what about the dignity debate there, Swapnil? I mean, aren't these women dignified enough? Because they have been opposing a regressive practice. They have been calling it, and we are looking at how it has turned into a mass gathering now. They have been saying down with the dictator right there in Iran.
Yes, Amita, that is definitely going to, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I hope it doesn't get into some sort of a great major revolution in that sense, where, there is a coup or anything of that sort, or, it gets into a bloodbath. But let's hope to the extent that it, at least does the change as it did in Dubai and other Emirati states to that extent, where they've liberalized to such a significant extent that from what I understand is that even live-in relationships are now allowed or legalized in Dubai.
Okay.
So, something of that sort, gradually I think Iran will also start changing, with all these revolutions taking place.
Right. This is a moment of reckoning, a revolution like you mentioned. Do stay on with us. We have Shaira Shali also joining us. Very, very powerful images that we are seeing on our screens. Women have been revolting in Iran. In this case, they are burning the hijab, saying this veil of oppression, we don't need it.
Yeah, so I totally stand by the women who decide they don't want to wear the hijab. Because firstly, we need to consider women's agency, that's first and foremost. And we need to respect will and agency of women. So whether they choose to wear the hijab or they choose not to wear the hijab, I'm standing with all women who decide that this is what I am, this is how I want to practice my faith, and this is not the way, I'm not going to practice my faith. Any imposition by the state is condemnable, whether a state tells you to wear the hijab and make it mandatory or the state tells you to remove the hijab. I'm standing with women and their choices and free will.
Right, because that's the point there, Sarah, even when it comes to any clothing that is attached to a woman becomes a controversy. And this is happening right there in Iran. We are looking at mass gatherings now, especially after the death of the young woman there.
Iran used to be pretty progressive, much earlier till this radicalism came in.
True.
So it's unfortunate that this is happening and it led to a death of a 22-year-old girl. It needs to be condemned in the harshest way possible across the globe. And people need to understand that radicalism is not the way forward. We need to respect women for their choices, whether they want to wear the hijab or whether they choose to remove the hijab. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so you're saying any comparisons are going to be unfair, because here the Karnataka government has also told the court that this is not the choice of the students. This is a PFI manufactured controversy and they have been tutoring these students. So in contrast with what's happening in Iran, and that's one of the worries as well, that their women are fighting for their rights because they don't want to wear hijab, whereas here in India there is a fight for oppression, with Dave saying in court that that is a veil of dignity, talking about dignity when it comes to hijab.
That is an unfair analogy. We will leave it to the relationship between the believer and the maker, because if somebody feels that this is modesty or this is the way she wants to practice Islam, we are nobody to question that person's faith. And compulsorily, if we are trying to disrobe somebody and say no, whether this is not intrinsic to Islam or whether it's intrinsic to Islam, that debate is something that we cannot reach a consensus on, because it's entirely between the believer and the maker, how he or she wants to practice their
Well, it's building up only according to those pictures and updates that we are getting in, Sarah. For the moment, thank you very much for your point of view. Farhan Faiz is also with us. What do you have to say? Because there have been parallels that have been drawn exactly what's happening in Iran and back home in India, especially with the hearing that as we speak is still happening in the Supreme Court. Mr. Faiz. Mr. Faiz, can you hear me, sir? सर आपको मेरी आवाज आ रही है?
All right, we'll go back to that in just a bit, but these are the visuals of the protest that's taking place in Iran, and this even as the Supreme Court takes up the hearing and resumes the hearing in the hijab case in the country. Madhav Das continues to be with us. Madhav, like you mentioned, after the Mahsa Amini case, over the last several years, it had been building up with women's rights being taken away one step at a time. Now, finally, it has come to the brink. This seems to have been the beginning of a revolution in Iran. Comes at a very, very crucial time with, in India as well, echoes of lessons to be learned from Iran.
Well, images certainly that have been rather unprecedented in recent times, if we can say that. We have seen protests.
Madhav, apologies, have to interrupt you. We're getting multiple reactions. Amber Zaidi is also with us. Amber, are you watching those pictures that are coming in from Iran? It's spread like wildfire. Such kind of gatherings that have been taking place, men and women alike, they are burning hijabs. Amber, can you hear me? Ms. Zaidi, can you hear me? All right, we're trying to reconnect with those lines that we are getting at this point. Multiple reactions that are still being pouring in. But Madhav, please continue with your point. Of course, with the parallels that are being drawn out back home in India as the hearing is still taking place. Madhav?
To defend
Yes,
hijab.
please.
Now that's how the debate has unfortunately panned out here in India. And of course on ground, while in Iran it is a fight or really of course a struggle against oppressive regimes. At the same time, of course, it is against this conservative views that women should be put in a hijab. The kind of protests that we're seeing on ground is clearly reflective of that. The kind of pictures that we're seeing today of protesters, pretty much dancing in celebration of the hijab being burnt, throwing it into the bonfire as it were, and several women coming out to toss the hijab into the bonfire. Two loud cheers and hoots that's being seen, and not just women, there are a fairly large proportion of men also present in that entire crowd, which clearly goes to show that this is of course a sign that enough is enough. The fact that a person had to lose their life for all of this to happen has clearly outraged citizens there in Iran, and that's quite evident in what's happening on ground over there. The larger question here is perhaps in the Indian context, while we're seeing of course a heated debate as to whether school children should be allowed the hijab or not, this debate adds another dimension altogether, and certainly
a new perspective to the entire controversy as well. Madhav, request you to stay on with us. We have Amber Zaidi back on the phone line with us. Are these comparisons fair? Would you say the contrast is not lost on anyone, even as women are burning the hijab in Iran after the death of a 22-year-old? In the Supreme Court, the fight is for wearing the hijab inside the educational institutions.
Whatever happening in Iran and on the contrary, what is going on in India is totally opposite to each other. And Iran, how women are fighting for their freedom and for their rights, and in India, women are trying to, they are not just fighting for the freedom of choice as people are saying. They are just being a tool of politics. And also, yes, the Supreme Court has also mentioned that those girls who started wearing hijab or burqa in these pre-university colleges, they were somehow they were members or they were activists of PIA. They were political tools, and now what is the entire intention behind this hijab law is questionable, and this is not a matter of freedom choice. Now they are just trying to impose their religious identity, which is being posed on women.
Of course, that remains to be seen what happens in the Supreme Court, because even as we speak, the hearing is taking place. It's been over a week as we've been looking at those regular hearings on the hijab case. Amber Zaidi, thank you very much for your point of view. This is a big story that is being developing. Of course, what's happening there in Iran can be heard when it comes to ripples back home as well.